We're seeing gold in the box, and these boxes are gigantic. I mean, even though you're seeing just a few specks, you know there's a lot of gold in there.
The sea never reveals its treasures willingly. There are no signs floating above the surface, no clear directions, no easy shortcuts. It doesn't care how confident you are, how much money you spend, or how advanced your equipment might be. The ocean swallows machines, destroys plans, drains fortunes, and leaves countless crews empty-handed after months of brutal work. Pulling gold from the ocean floor has ruined more people than it has rewarded. But Shawn Pomrenke was different. He didn't leave with losses. He uncovered a fortune. Far beneath the icy waters of the Bering Sea sat an estimated $115 million in gold, scattered across a section of sea floor that looked completely ordinary to anyone without the experience to understand it. No visible clue, no obvious marker, just miles of underwater gravel, hiding riches formed over millions of years and buried beneath decades of failed attempts and overlooked ground. Shawn Pomrenke didn't stumble onto it through luck or accident. He found it through precision, discipline, and a lifetime of understanding this exact stretch of ocean. He grew up here. He learned these waters from his father, the same way some people inherit a language. Over time, the seafloor stopped looking random to him. He could read it instinctively, spotting patterns and signals invisible to most people. What others called intuition was actually decades of experience operating beneath conscious thought. When the evidence finally aligned, the data, the geological indicators, and his own instincts all pointing to the same location, Shawn made his move. The dredging equipment went into the water, and the operation began. What came back up from the bottom of the Bering Sea didn't just transform his company. It forced the entire offshore mining industry to rethink what was possible. Suddenly, people started asking a new question. How much wealth is still hidden beneath the sea floor, waiting for someone skilled enough to find it? This is the complete story, every stage of it. And trust me, this journey starts on the surface and ends in the deepest layers below. If you're new here, make sure to like, subscribe, and let's dive in. There's a type of knowledge that can't truly be taught in a classroom. Teachers can explain it, books can describe it, experts can build theories around it, but real-world mastery, the kind that allows someone to make split-second decisions in harsh and unpredictable environments, only comes from experience, from years of repetition, from failure, adaptation, and relentless exposure to the same unforgiving conditions until the environment itself becomes readable. That's the kind of connection Shawn Pomrenke has with the Bering Sea. He didn't develop it later in life after choosing a career path. He absorbed it from childhood, watching his father work these waters year after year. He learned the rhythms of the sea, the movement of sediment, the locations where valuable material gathers, and the subtle clues hidden in the ocean's surface and beneath it. His father, Shawn Pomrenke, built the family's gold dredging business from humble beginnings into one of Alaska's most successful offshore mining operations. But the real inheritance wasn't the machinery, the permits, or the infrastructure, although those mattered. The true foundation was knowledge. Detailed, hard-earned understanding of the Bering Sea goldfields gathered through decades of direct experience. Shawn inherited that knowledge and expanded it with tools his father's generation never had access to. Modern sea floor mapping technology changed everything. Advanced multi-beam sonar systems could now generate detailed 3D images of the ocean floor, revealing underwater structures with incredible clarity. Sub-bottom profilers allowed crews to see beneath surface sediments and locate buried gravel layers where placer gold naturally collects. Powerful data processing systems combined geological and geophysical information into complete visual models of the seafloor. Steve Pomrenke learned to read the ocean through instinct and experience. Shah learned to combine instinct with data, and together, those two forms of knowledge became something far more powerful. Traditional dredging expertise already made it possible to find gold. Miners had been doing that for generations, but with modern mapping layered on top of that experience, the search became dramatically more precise. Areas that once looked promising based only on surface observations could now be analyzed in extraordinary detail before a dredge ever touched the water. Ancient river channels buried beneath the seabed, bedrock ridges, gravel traps where heavy minerals naturally settled over thousands of years. All of it could now be identified and targeted with accuracy that previous generations could only dream about. The difference now was precision. Every section of seafloor could be analyzed, mapped, and ranked before the dredge even touched the water. Instead of guessing where the gold might be, the operation could focus directly on where the evidence said it actually was. And that level of accuracy is what ultimately led to the discovery of nearly $115 million in gold. But to understand what Shawn Pomrenke uncovered, you first have to understand how gold even ends up at the bottom of the Bering Sea in the first place. Gold doesn't just appear in ocean sediment out of nowhere. Its journey begins millions of years earlier in the mountains of western Alaska. Deep underground hydrothermal systems formed hard rock gold deposits, the same kinds of deposits traditional miners chase beneath the earth today. Over immense stretches of time, those rocks slowly broke apart through erosion. Rivers carried the loosened material toward the coast, and because gold is incredibly heavy, it settled wherever currents weakened or water movement changed direction. Those concentrated accumulations are called placer deposits. When they form in rivers, they're known as alluvial placers. When they form offshore on the ocean floor, they become marine placers, and the seafloor near Nome happens to be one of the richest marine placer gold regions on the planet. That didn't happen by accident. Several rare geological conditions came together in exactly the right way. Ancient river systems once transported massive quantities of gold into the region. Over time, changing sea levels repeatedly reshaped and reconcentrated those deposits. At the same time, the underwater landscape itself created natural collection points where dense minerals settled and remained trapped. Add in relatively shallow water depths that dredging equipment can actually reach, and you end up with one of the most productive offshore gold environments ever discovered. People have known the gold was there for more than a century. The famous Nome Gold Rush began after prospectors discovered gold directly on the beaches. Waves had pulled gold from shallow offshore deposits and pushed it onto the shoreline, where miners could collect it with simple pans and basic tools. That beach gold led explorers offshore, and generation after generation of dredging crews pushed farther into the sea, searching for richer ground. But marine placer deposits work very differently from riverbeds or beaches. The gold isn't spread evenly across the sea floor. It doesn't blanket the ocean bottom in a uniform layer. Instead, it gathers in very specific locations, natural traps formed by geology and underwater terrain, low areas in buried bedrock, ancient river channels hidden beneath younger sediment, depressions, cracks, potholes, and structural pockets where heavy minerals settled over thousands or even millions of years while lighter material washed away. Find those traps and you find the gold. Miss them, and you can spend an entire season dredging productive ground while recovering only a tiny fraction of what's actually sitting below you. That's why modern seafloor mapping changed everything. It didn't prove the gold existed. Miners already knew that. What it changed was the ability to pinpoint where the richest concentrations were hidden. Before advanced mapping systems, crews had to rely almost entirely on physical sampling. They would place a dredge over one section of seafloor after another, testing ground piece by piece. It worked, but it was slow, expensive, and incredibly inefficient. Shawn Pomrenke approached the problem differently. First, his team conducted detailed mapping of the target zone. Multi-beam sonar created a precise 3D model of the seafloor itself. Then sub-bottom profilers scanned beneath the sediment, revealing the buried bedrock landscape hidden underneath. Once those data sets were combined, a much clearer picture emerged. Every depression, every buried channel, every possible mineral trap became visible. And one feature immediately stood out. Hidden beneath the sediment was a deep bedrock depression, essentially an ancient pothole carved into the prehistoric landscape long before rising sea levels covered the area. It sat in a location that previous dredging crews had never directly tested. What makes that remarkable is how close others had already come. The surrounding areas had been worked before. Dredges had operated nearby season after season. But the richest point, the deepest part of the buried depression, where the heaviest gold naturally concentrated, had been missed over and over again. Not because it was far away, because it was invisible. The sediment covering the feature completely masked it from surface observation. And without sub-bottom profiling technology, there was simply no way to recognize what was hidden underneath. For thousands of years, that gold deposit sat untouched beneath nearly 12 meters of icy Bering Sea water, waiting for someone with the right combination of technology, experience, and persistence to finally uncover it. Shawn Pomrenke had all three, and once the data revealed what was down there, he knew exactly what had to happen next, because finding the target was only the beginning. Actually reaching it was an entirely different challenge. The Bering Sea does not make anything easy, and this is the part people usually leave out. When you hear $115 million in gold recovered from the ocean floor, it can sound almost simple in hindsight. Scan the seafloor, locate the deposit, drop the dredge, strike it rich. But that version skips over the reality that the Bering Sea fights every single step of the process. Offshore dredging near Nome only has a short operating window each year, usually from June through October if conditions cooperate. 5 months sounds manageable until you realize the weather cuts deeply into that timeline. A large portion of those days become unusable because the Bering Sea changes fast and without warning. One moment the water is workable, the next, swells are too violent for accurate dredging. Thick fog rolls in, and visibility collapses to just a few meters beyond the vessel. Winds build surface conditions that push even experienced crews to their limits. And below the surface, underwater currents constantly shove the vessel off position, forcing crews to reposition again and again, just to stay on target. Every hour becomes a battle against the environment. Shawn Pomrenke spent his entire life learning how to operate in those conditions. His crew wasn't assembled randomly, they were trained specifically for this environment. Over years of trial, failure, and refinement, the vessels and dredging systems were modified to survive conditions that would overwhelm less experienced operations. But surviving the Bering Sea and mastering it are two very different things. The newly identified target had to be mined with extreme precision. The dredge head needed to stay locked over a very specific buried depression, while waves, wind, and underwater currents constantly tried to push it away. Every movement mattered. So the crew worked methodically. Instead of attacking the center immediately, they approached the deposit carefully from the outer edges inward, following the sequence most likely to maximize recovery from a concentrated placer trap. Then came the first pass directly across the core of the buried depression. The material brought on board and processed through the recovery system immediately caught everyone's attention. The numbers were wrong, in the best possible way. Not slightly better than expected, dramatically better. The concentrates coming off the system were packed with fine gold. And when you've spent years reading recovery material, you know the difference between ordinary pay gravel and something truly exceptional before the final cleanup even happens. This wasn't background gold, this was a real concentration. Over the next several days, the crew systematically worked the entire feature. They mapped the boundaries of the high-grade zone, tracked the richest sections, and recovered as much material as possible while weather conditions still allowed operations to continue. All the while, the positioning systems kept the dredge aligned exactly where the survey data indicated the gold should be. Then came the first official cleanup, and the final numbers confirmed everything the crew already suspected. The buried bedrock depression, identified through modern seafloor mapping, the ancient pothole hidden beneath layers of sediment and untouched by previous operations, was an extraordinarily rich gold trap. Combined with nearby zones that the survey data had also prioritized, the season's recovery totaled an amount so significant it required formal documentation and outside verification. More than $115 million in gold, recovered from a section of Bering Sea seafloor that miners had worked around for decades without ever directly identifying the true center of the deposit. The gold had been there the entire time. The ocean guarded it for thousands of years. And in a single season, one operation finally uncovered it because they combined experience, patience, and modern technology in exactly the right way. Now step back from the gold itself for a moment. Step back from the dredges, the sonar systems, the recovery tables, and the icy water sitting 12 meters above an ancient, buried landscape. Step back from Shawn Pomrenke, from his father's lifetime of knowledge, and from the bedrock depression that had remained hidden since the last ice age. Because this story is about something much bigger. At its core, it's the same pattern that appears over and over throughout history. Different industries, different environments, different tools, but always the same principle. Someone with the right combination of knowledge, discipline, and methodology looks at something everyone else has already seen and notices what others missed. The offshore goldfields near Nome